I am really excited to talk to Casey Mcgarr. He creates stunning letterpress printed posters and makes CNC routed wood type and blocks. He established Inky Lips Letterpress in 2001, which has been designing and printing invitations and poster work for a variety of local, national, and international clients, as well as teaching letterpress workshops. Casey's also an associate professor at Texas A&M University Commerce. He's teaching in the visual communication program at the downtown Dallas location. And I have to admit, I love Casey's work. Like, I'm so excited about today. He makes stunningly vintage inspired work with wonderful pops of color. He has a sense of humor unlike anyone else's, which just makes me love him more. So Casey, thank you so much for being our hang host today. I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah.
I really am surprised. I'm so happy to be here and to be invited to this. I want to thank Stephanie and for the invitation, and I want to thank Jim and also Peter also. So before I get started, and thank you for allowing me to do this. And Rick Griffin showed his jukebox. I just wanted to show y'all my jukebox real quick that I got from a good friend. Let me see here. That I got from a good friend, Virgil Scott. I think that's it. Right there. Beautiful jukebox. So happy to have that. So we're playing music and everything, and I love some of the Motown. I have half of that with Motown. But again, thanks for everybody for joining. I hope you like the presentation, and I'll kind of get started here. So, you know, I started letterpress printing as a printer in 2001, and I got really inspired by some of the things. When I was at Fossil, we did some collaboration with Jim Sheridan, and that's kind of what got me into it. So before I get into that, I went to Texas Tech out in Lubbock, Texas for my education in graphic design. I came to Dallas when I graduated, worked in an ad agency for a couple of years, and then I went to work at Fossil. And I was at Fossil where I really got inspired using the vintage 40s and 50s advertisements, their packaging, their label design, their logo design. I mean, we all encompass that vintage heritage that the 40s and 50s. And, you know, we used to say that Fossil owned the 50s back in the 90s. I was one of the first designers hired back in 1991. And, you know, that was pre-computer. And so I made some really nice slicks, as they would say, you know, anyway, for paste up. But I really fell in love with the 50s artwork. I fell in love with the colors. I fell in love with the illustrations those guys did back then. And what we would do is we would take all those illustrations or that line art that was done by artists, and we would manipulate it, and we would make it, turn the whole concept and make it say something else. And so that's what we were doing. And that's kind of what inspired me to further that investigation when I became a letterpress printer. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. So back in, I guess, how I got into letterpress was back in 1994, I guess, when I was at Fossil. We did somebody, I think it was John Dorcas, got really inspired. He saw Hatch Show print, and we gave Jim Sheridan a call, and we went out to Hatch and did some tin designs, and Jim got on one of his presses, one of the Vandercooks, and started putting some images down. You know, we wanted race cars and everything, and he put type down, and we were just like, wow, this is really cool. You know, I mean, all these great images, and I really didn't know what I was looking at. And so he started printing, and we stayed there for a couple of days, and he printed all this stuff, and we scanned it and put it on tin designs. And that carried us through about a year of doing kind of a hatch montage, and it was a great collaboration. And then in 1996, we went back to Hatch Show Print and since I was part of the image group and was one of the creative directors along with Stephen Zong, we ended up doing a annual report. It was a matchbook cover. And so we went out to see Jim, and Jim carved that globe image with cars going around it. And the next day we showed up and he said, here, this is what I've got. And he had that lino cut image, and I went, oh my gosh, he did that in one night? That's amazing. I couldn't believe he actually did that in one night. So that's when I started getting the buzz, and I invited Jim to come to Dallas to speak to the DSVC, which is the Dallas Society of Visual Communicators here in Dallas. And he spoke to a group here. And then I left Fossil and started working with Arthur Anderson and lost my job there in 2001. And then I called Jim up and I said, hey, Jim, do you have any type or presses that you want to sell? And he kind of laughed, and the Jim laughed and he said, no, we're a museum. We can't do that. So he pointed me in some directions about printers and everything. And so my first press was a Challenge 15 MP. And then I went to a Vandercook 4. And then I bought a Kluge and then replaced it with the Heidelberg windmill. And then purchased a Vandercook 3228 and then got rid of that. And then ended up with a universal, let me see if I can get this. And so I have this universal one adjustable bed, hand crank, and then I do work on the universal 3 adjustable bed, and it's automatic. So I love these presses. So I'll give you a quick tour before I get further in it. So cabinet full of wood type, some of the wood type on my CNC, I'll show you in a minute. And then just cabinets of metal type, some poster work, some of the Charles Anderson masks in metal type, and my Hammond glider saw, which is a valuable instrument when you're cutting wood type. The careful part, rolling rack, old C and Chandler Price cutter, and then some more type cabinets and some more type, and then posters that I've worked on. So yeah, so when I got that bug, I just started printing a lot of wedding invitations and corporate identity and some poster work for myself. And then in 2010, or in 2007, I went back to school and got my MFA. My professors here on the hang, it's Virgil Scott. And then in 2012, I went to work for the same university, Texas A&M Commerce. And that's when some of my research funds allowed me to purchase the CNC router, which is a Fireball Comet CNC router. And so before then, I was carving everything in linoleum, hand carving, which I love the methodical nature of that. And, in letterpress in general, it's not fast. And my wife always asked me, why are you getting into letterpress? Everything's going to the computer. And I said, if I can push myself away from the computer and slow down and create something, that's just makes me feel better. And she said, okay. So we've been parking on the street ever since, since the garage is my global studio, amalgamated, Inky Lips Press. So I'll show you some of the things I've been working on. And then in right after that, I'll go over some of the type that I've done and things. And I hope everybody can see this okay.
Yeah, you're looking good so far, Casey.
Okay, good. So, I started making these small notebooks, and y'all have seen those before. And in one year I was at Hamilton and Gail Anderson was there speaking, and I got to talk to her for quite a while and ended up making a few hundred of those for SVA that she would hand out to her students which was really exciting for me. You know, one year I made 50, one year I made 150, and it just kept on going. And then SVA started making their own. And so when I started doing that, I got into leather, and I'll only go with this real quick, but I got into leather goods. And I said, I need something to put it in. So I started making these leather pouches and everything. So that lasted for a while. But some of the things that you saw Stephanie show on the image that she projected for this hang was some of the journal work that I do. So what I had done originally is these were cards that I printed, and you know, this one was photopolymer, and I think that's the only one, and I think that one was I made in photopolymer. And then I said, well, you know, I need to carve that. I need to see if I can carve it on the router. And I'm not using hard maple. I'm actually using MDF boards. So those are those MDF boards, and I coat it with 2 coats of polyurethane, and then I carve onto it. So this is a recent one that I carved. It's Home Sweet Home, and that's pretty small type. And then the Space Monkey. So the MDF is 3/4 of an inch thick, and I use an orbital sander right there to do some of the finishing, to get off some of the dust. And then I put 2 coats of polyurethane on it, and end up doing the orbital sander again. But that's pretty small type. You know, it carves really well. The CNC carves really well, but it's taken me a while to understand how deep can I go. It's just like carving some of the wood type. How deep can I go with what bit to use when there's detail? So some of the finishing. The doorway to alien abduction. So I try to take humor into everything. You know, here's the blood, sweat, and tears, Mojave Jack, blood, sweat in the swamp. His fingers were lightning on the Brea, which is, you know, and that's, you know, what I talk about being at Fossil and using line art. I don't use it right out of the books that I have. I manipulate it, I tear it apart. You know, there's a cowboy hat, there's an alligator head, there's the torso. I put a brayer in his hand and an eating knife, and then put a swamp kind of scene back there. And it's the same thing with this, you know, it's different pieces and parts that I use to make all this up. And so here's that carving for the aliens. I'll show you a little bit of the poster work that I've done. So everything I do and all these posters I do, so I start with a lot of research, and I love the magic. I love magic. And when I started doing a lot of the research, historical from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, and I loved, you know, how they would have the theater that's up here, and large type, and some kind of large head of the magician, and then all this other little stuff. So, you know, and I'm not going to knock anything off, but I'm going to take it as research and reference. So, you know, hair and scalp manipulating, hypnotic palm reading, mostly gorgeous, not extremely gorgeous, but mostly gorgeous girls and oddities, and it's the magic of the unusualness. So here is, you know, I don't know how big that is. I think it's 16 inches wide, but you can see some of the carving. This is MDF, and it's done a really great job. You know, some of the counters, you can see even the smaller counters on the ampersands holds up, but that all depends on what the depth that I'm carving at. Here's a pirate with a big fanciful beard. That was for a Halloween poster. Moving on, like that journal you saw when I did this poster, you know, it's cosmic chaos. so terrifying, and it could be true. And then here's the MDF. I said linoleum earlier, I meant MDF. So MDF, and that's, 1 inch high type. And this was, this is a city that I found, and I had to redraw it, and then redraw all these spaceships from science fiction pulp fiction novels that I got off loc.gov, Library of Congress. They've got a huge library of, and I look at, whether it's science, pulp fiction on science fiction, or detective. I love the colors and the typography, and I try to bring in that to all of my work. And so here's Mojave Jack in his swamp feeling. And this, so the pants came from another cowboy, the torso was another cowboy, and then the head is an alligator in the hat. And so there was a lot of manipulation of images, and I keep on referencing back to Fossil because I really learned how to do that at Fossil, and then bring humor into it. Let me put this poster over here real quick. And so here's that carving, and so that type is about, I don't know, 3/4 or ½ inch tall. Let's see. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Yes, they do have questions. You're either
Yeah.
seeing the chat or you are absolutely magical, Casey. The two questions we've got right now are, how do you get MDF to type high to 0.918?
Yeah. Okay. So great. I love that. So I use the hardboard. I go to Lowe's and buy hardboard. Let me see here. So I buy this hardboard, and I'll just cut it down to whatever the dimensions are. So it's usually one piece of hardboard behind the 3/4 inch MDF, and then one 22-point chipboard. And that brings it pretty close to type high. And what's great is that I do have that adjustable bed, so I can bring it up or lower it. But that's what I use every single time, and it seems to work. And sometimes I have to elevate it or one side of the MDF. But the reason I like the MDF so much is that it's remains completely flat. When I was carving in linoleum, the particle board seems like moisture seeps into that a lot more, and so it tends to warp, and that's not a favorite of mine because it takes. Sometimes it just gets ruined over a couple of years. So I went to MDF. A friend of mine down in Houston, Carlos Hernandez, who runs Burning Bones Press, with another guy, carve on huge pieces of MDF. And so I kind of got inspired by him.
Nice.
Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah. And then there was one more that was, how do you deal with the dust? How do you manage all the dust?
Well, when I'm carving, I've got a dust collector, which is, let me see if I can do this again. I've got that dust collector. So this is the Fireball Comet. And so I have a dust collector there. When it comes to, this thing, even though it's got, a bucket down there for the sawdust, dust tends to get around. I mean, I try to wipe off my presses the best I can when there's dust, but sometimes it just gets dusty in here. I have, today I cleaned yesterday I cleaned my shop and got rid of some of the dust. So y'all would think it's, this global studio here, which is a little humor, works. So, but there's always dust, there's always particles, but I seem to manage pretty well.
Sweet, thank you.
Yeah. So here was the blood sweat, from the swamp. Then this poster, it came from the bayou. This was actually, he came from an old poster, and then I put a brayer in his hand, and then did some type. I thought that type worked pretty well, and then I wrote the copy down here. But it turned out pretty nice. I mean, the linoleum held up. It just seems to, on some finer detail, it seems to flake. And I'm not crazy about it, about anything flaking off. So, so real quick, I think, you know, that's a little bit of the poster work that I've done. I've got other posters that I've done. I think recently, you know, I did this one, which it won't kill you to be careful today. Put your mask on. You know, we continue to see people. I think it's just something that we should honor. And then keep smiling. Smile a while, and while you smile, another smiles, and soon there are miles of smiles and smiles. And life's worthwhile because you smile. I thought that was funny. A little bit of, you know, Valentine's Day poster, love me more, I love you s'more. And then, you know, when I just love overprinting. So I have a bunch of cuts and everything, and some of the wood type, and I love overprinting. I love all of that. I think it just brings about, you know, I love to come in here and experiment. And I think that's what kind of jazzes me, is like, what can I do? How can I make it fresh? And I, for the most part, I think we all do that, you know. Some ink from the itinerant printer, some of that day glow ink. Don't ever start a fight and don't run from one either. So I did a lot of posters with cowboy sayings. I guess it was last summer. I tried to do one each day, and I think I made maybe 30 of those posters and really had a lot of fun. So now I want to talk a little bit about the wood type and how I make it. And before I get into that, does anybody else have any questions at all for me?
There was one question about the CNC and how accurate it is. Do you find that the one you're using is fairly accurate?
Well, I did a lot of research and went on to CNC boards back in 2012 when the school purchased it for me. And the Fireball Comet came up as one of the best and most accurate, but this CNC has worked since 2012, and it's better than I am. You know, and I'll get into this in a minute, but you know, even when I'm making wood type, or even when I'm doing the poster work on the MDF, I do all that in Adobe Illustrator, and then I'll transfer that to my AutoCAD, which is I use VCarve Pro, and it'll bring in an Adobe Illustrator file or a DXF file. And so once it's brought in, it'll let you give the dimensions of the board, you know, how big of the board it is, how big the wood is, whether you're using 10 by 20, 18 by 24 board, or what, so your landscape, so it's your platform. But then that's where all the detail comes in. So it's using the right bit, you know, and I can go over those with you real quick. So, you know, any of these, let me turn my camera around real quick. So any of these that I have, and any of this wood type down here, this is some of the wood type that I make, and and this B, but the bits is what's the most critical part, and the depth of the cut. So if I have to do it the right way in AutoCAD, because this machine is going to do what I tell it, right? I mean, it's like any software, any machine that we run. And so if I use the right bit, the proper bit, like this one I use to, you know, take out a lot of the wood that's not needed for the image or for the type. And then I'll go down to like a 1/32, which is this. And then if I need to, I'll go down to a 1/16. like this, or I think that's a 1/64. And then the last bit. And so this bit, the 1/32 or 1/64 is really a finishing bit after I use this bullnose bit. And then the last one I use is this V-carve bit right here. And that gets into these really, really tight areas. But so if I'm using a V, so I'm going to sit back a little bit. When I'm using this one, I'll cut at about a 0.07 into the wood down to carve out all of that. And then the next bits I use, whether it's this one that I showed you a second ago, right there, or the V-carve bit, depending on if it's a counter or a thin stroke, I'll only go down like 0.05. So it's really important that, you know, that's the final stage. If I do the right bits in the CAD software, and when I put them on the Fireball Comet, everything is going to be perfect unless I screw it up in, you know, doing the AutoCAD. And I've done that many a times. I did a big ampersand one time and the bit just went all over it. Just kind of laughed and went, well, that didn't work out. So I'm self-taught on the AutoCAD, and it took me about a year to get used to it, but it's taken me, you know, what is this, 8 years now, and I'm pretty comfortable with it. So was there another question?
Yeah, how big is the bed on your CNC that you're using?
So the Fireball Comet is a 25 by 25 inch bed. And so I can put when I'm carving an 18 by 24 poster, the board is about 19 by 26. And, you know, I use, let me turn my screen around real quick. So I'll use, you know, coins, and I'll lock up the piece of wood or whatever it is in the press bed, but then I'll also use these to push down on the corners. So let me go over here real quick. So this is a piece of hard maple, it's slab. The type that I carve is not ingrained, it's on slab. I can easily get that, but I'll lock this up with coins, and I'll put these on the corners to make sure it's completely flush with this board, with the bed right here. And that's what helps. So even if I carve something really wide that's, you know, 19 by 26, the variance on the bed from here to there, it maybe be, you know, a 64th of an inch, which is a lot, you know, if it's either high or low. So I try to carve, when I'm carving, it doesn't matter on posters, but when I'm carving wood type, I try to keep the material at least, you know, 5 or 6 inches height and 11 or 12 inches long. That way, you know, I can get a couple of, you know, characters on it all the way across. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay.
And you said you were going to talk a bit about your wood type making.
Yeah. So some of the type, and I showed you this piece over here. So even, you know, I get slab, and I go to hardwood lumber here in Dallas, and they're pretty good. And so, you know, I'll buy an 8-foot piece, and then I'll cut it up, and I'll do the same process. I'll use polyurethane, and then I'll do the orbital sander, and I use polyurethane again and the orbital sander, and it gives a really nice finish. You know, that's it raw, and that's it without. But so it takes about a day or two to finish all that. But, you know, going over some of the wood types, so I'll go over some of that, and then I'll tell you the process that I do. So there's some Berthold block, some Arcadian. I wanted to carve this just because I thought it was just the coolest font that I've ever seen. But because it's a 9-line, I can't even get a headline on the bed of the press on my Uni 1. You know, it's just too wide, but I love it. And then some Gothic shadow. Here's some Tuscan 27-line that I carved a while ago. You have a question?
Yeah, but keep going. I'll gather them. Don't worry.
Okay. Okay. And then Antique Tuscan #1. That's 21-line. Airbag, and a lot of this, you know, and this right here is Celtic ornamentation, ornamental. A lot of this, I like the font. I want to do the font, but a lot of it is can I carve it? And so it's a challenge to me to try to even carve it. So there's some currency and some inline, some Colombian, and some Ranger, some octagon. What is that? Octagon, Gothic octagon shade that David Wolski helped me with when I had questions. And some Etna, some rustic, and then some Yearwood. And a lot of this, you can tell that I haven't printed it all with it. Some Etruscan, Jefferson. And some condensed, and some Tuscan Gothic shade. Cigar label, which I've barely used at all, but I love it. Campanelle, and then some Mansard. And I've done some ornaments, but what I found is that, you know, here I have this Gothic Tuscan 20-line caps, and I have lowercase, but I was missing a bunch of characters, so I'm able to, you know, this is only a 2-line or 2A that I had, and I'm sure it was bigger than that. And so I just started carving that and carving the bees and other characters. But
and are you looking at, well, maybe you're going to get there now. I was there. Are you looking at type specimens then to do your drawing work, or basing it on other characters?
No, that's great. So that's what I'm doing now, is that, you know, here's my collection of wood type books. You know, we had the Rob Roy Kelly book, and then this is a Dover publication. It's the same. And then Victorian alphabets. And then this one is from the Carey collection. And then the Art of Wood Type. So what the interesting part is that, you know, all the type that I've carved, it's come from all these books. So if I wanted to carve, you know, it's, you know, whether it's the Rob Roy Kelly book or some other book, and it's interesting because when they carved it and they printed it, you know, the carving is like the first generation, right? That the actual letter. And then when they print it, that's the second generation. And then when they scan it and put it into a publication, or is that the third generation? And then when I scan it, that's the, you know, my scanner's is good, and it's the fourth generation. And then when I get it into the computer, you know, and try to outline it, that's, you know, so we're talking that by the time I'm using it and trying to get a good grasp of, you know, the serifs or the slab serifs or the horizontal strokes or the crossbars or whatever, it's taken it's gone through a lot of generations. So whatever I scan, all those font that you've just seen, I've had to recreate in Illustrator. So I've had to I go back and I look at these type specimen books, and I'll look at the scan that I did, and I'll measure all the strokes, the vertical strokes off axis. I'll measure the counters and make sure that all those are consistent with characters in that font. So, you know, if the letter H, capital H, in that vertical stroke, I'd measure the width of that, and I'll go to the letter I and look at that vertical stroke. And a lot of times they're not the same, or even the crossbars or the serifs are not the same. So I'll go in there in Adobe Illustrator and make them the same, but I stay true to the type specimen books from that, for all those books that I just showed you. And it takes me probably 20 hours to do that. And that's the start of when I start to make wood type, and then, you know, putting it into the CAD software, and making sure that production is a one added process. So there's a lot of process that goes into it, you know, and I don't know who it was, if it was Jim, you know, those guys that were making wood type long time ago had these templates, and they were, you do production. And I think now there's a lot of us on this hang that love type and are type designers. I don't think I'm a type designer, but I love creating this old wood type. And because, and I'll go back, because when I first started, buying wood type on eBay was inexpensive. You know, getting that Tuscan font for $120 upper and lower case was amazing. But now I can't touch it. So back in 2012, when I came to work at Texas A&M Commerce and got the CNC, I can make my own, which really, really helps. You know, I love making type. And when I started making the type, I said, well, why couldn't I be able to carve also on, you know, for all my poster work? So
that was good. Good.
Yeah.
I will say one thing, as you show us around, if you could go just a bit slower, where
Sure.
that sounds good. And then that was actually goes along with one of the questions. Somebody said, have you designed digital type? But it sounds like you're kind of bridging that history and looking at the specific past designs and cutting those.
Right. I don't, you know, what I've created, I don't turn it into digital. Actually, I don't know how to do that at all. You know, I can, you know, I have everything in the computer, but I don't know how to do that, you know. Great. But yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I would say there's two questions before we get to a new one. Someone just asked. Someone wanted to know if we could actually see the depth on those CNC cuts, just to kind of see it up close. Because it sounded like you do multiple cuts, just like we do on the pantograph.
Yeah, the depth of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So let me turn this around real quick. Hold on just a minute. So can y'all see that okay?
Yeah, that's looking pretty good.
Okay, so this is when I didn't really understand how to cut very well. And so everything is at the same depth. I think that's at 0.07 or 0.08 depth. And let me get to something newer. So then, you know, and I'm looking at some of my type, my wood type, that, and I have some that's been die cut out, and, you know, you have some that's been laminated, you know, they did that. And then I look at metal type, and, you know, the depths of the first cut, which is, can y'all see that okay? The depth of the first cut, you know, which is, you know, getting rid of all this wood that we don't need, right? I think that's a bad, let me come over here and do this. So there is different depths in here. So this is a 0.07 right here. Mm-hmm. And then inside of this counter right there, I think that y'all can see that, is I think is a 0.04. And inside the, you know, these counters in here is a 0.04. But then even some of the detail work, like this cowboy, you know, that cowboy is not very tall, but, you know, some of the detail work in this cowboy, and even some of the type, I'll even go down to a 0.03. When I, you know, let me look at some of this right here. So this type doesn't have much relief on it. I mean, it's very short, very small. So
We,
I'm kind of wondering. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I would say we have that type at Hamilton, and it was die stamped. It wasn't pantograph cut. That exact style
Yeah.
that we have, and the A even has it stamped, the maker's mark, in the shoulder instead of on the end, which is traditional.
Wow. Well, and so that kind of lends me to believe, and a lot, and like this is very deep.
Mhm.
So I was always curious is why they why most of the fonts were really, really deep. What was the purpose? It's almost like it was a challenge between wood type makers back then. I can go really deep. I don't know. I'm just bringing that up. I don't know what the purpose was, but there's a lot of relief on that. Maybe you or Jim can give some insight to that.
Yeah, it looks like he got up for a sec. Well, I would say that one was die stamped, which Hamilton never did the type. They only did their patterns die stamped. And I actually think they try to keep the relief fairly low when they're cutting back at the pantograph. They always do the second routering, and they'll bring that bit up just like you do. So you can see the second routering where they're getting into those more detailed areas.
Right.
But they try to keep it fairly. There's a very specific, and I don't know the depth, and I don't think we have any of our wood type cutters on the call, but there is a specific depth they try to keep it to.
Yeah, and that's even when you saw the let me turn this camera around real quick. When you saw like this right here, and you see the sharpness when it's coming up right here. That's what's good about this V carve bit. So, if I'm doing this finishing bit right here, if I'm doing the finishing, I'm probably only going down a 0.04. If the original cut is a 0.07 here, then when I'm doing this finishing, I'm probably going down to 0.04, and it will come out and really come out of this counter of this part of this M really tight, if y'all can see that. So it's a really sharp edge. It's not rounded like some of the bits that I've used before. Which
yeah, that's beautiful detail.
Yeah, and I still have to go in there with a knife and do some of the finishing work that the router can't do. So
great.
Yeah.
Somebody did ask, what's the pad on your orbital sander?
So good question. So yeah, so I went on to a lot of sites on how to finish wood, and this one guy that was getting this extremely gloss finish on his wood, cabinet making or whatever it was. Let me see if I can get this. So I'm using, it's a 3M final finishing pads for this, and it's pretty smooth. Instead of using sandpaper, and I've used sandpaper before, but the sandpaper is only as good as I am. So if I'm putting more pressure on part of the wood, then it becomes a little bit lower, or it gets scuffed up. And I found that these pads give really a really nice finishing on it. So I'll finish all the wood before I start carving. Yeah, and I'll do that on I'll do it twice. I'll do it on the first year I do the wood, and I'll come back on the very last one, and it seems to give a really nice, smooth finish, which is perfect for what everyone here loves.
Thank you. That you're sharing a lot of details, and I appreciate that. I know you've got a lot of people drooling over the type you make and loving knowing those details. So thank you.
Yeah, sure.
The only last question really is, you can talk about whatever you want, but somebody just thought they might want to know more about your teaching.
My teaching. So, okay, I'll tell you how. So I started teaching in 2003 as an adjunct at Collin College. And then I met my professor and the professor that I work with currently, Virgil Scott. And Virgil was in my shop back in 2006 maybe, and 2006, and he was looking around and he said, "Man, this is cool." He said, "Do you want to teach type?" And I said, "Dude, I don't know how to teach. I don't know anything about type." And he looked around, he started laughing, and I was going like, "Why are you laughing at me, dude?" I started getting like, "Why are you laughing at me?" He says, "You don't do anything but type. You work with type all the time," which I thought was pretty funny, you know. And I went, "Oh, okay. So yeah, I'll do that." So I teach at Texas A&M Commerce, and I teach typography, the beginning typography class, and I love type. And I teach graphic design 1, the very first design 1 class, and I teach typography. Teach letterpress printing to second year students. And we have a lot of fun. We have some really great presses. We have a small Anderson Vreeland photopalmer plate maker, and we have on order a laser cutter. So really excited. We haven't got that in, so really excited about that. I don't think anybody's supposed to know that yet. So shh. And then I teach in the MFA program. So I teach design education. I teach pedagogy, which is making the students make a university from the ground, the curriculum for a university from the ground up. They write the mission statement, they write all the assignments, they write the syllabi, they write all the rubrics, and they do an editorial piece that they would use for marketing. I teach another design education class where the students write the design philosophy, creative philosophy, teaching philosophy, and I teach an exhibition class also in the summer when they're finished with their thesis. And I sit on a few thesis committees too, but when they're getting ready to do an installation or do a website, I help them along with that. There's, Virgil helps them with the exhibition class, putting it together, and then I'm just kind of the next classes where I make sure that they're all in order. So, yeah.
There's a ton of positive energy in the chat about having you as an instructor. So,
no, I love to teach. I did design work and work for clients, and it's in the way we teach at A&M Commerce. It's all about the student. It's always about the student. It's not about how I feel, but it's always engaging them and making sure that they get where they need to be when they graduate. And that's the most important. And I think that if for anybody out there that's a professor that's listening, that's our commitment. And we all believe that. And, when you get that glimmer in that student's eye that gets it, man, that's a great feeling. It's like printing letterpress printing for the first time. You just get a great feeling.
That magic that you get to see on the faces when they pull that print.
Yeah.
We have asked you a lot of questions, but you have 10 more minutes. Is there anything you really wanted to make sure you shared with us?
Oh, I love to cycle.
That's amazing.
I love to cycle, and I'm pretty active. I competed in Taekwondo sparring tournaments for a while. I got a couple of first place trophies. This is over and above letterpress. I did the Pocky Challenge, the 1-chip challenge, which is excruciatingly painful. If anybody knows about that, it was horrible. It was only 1 chip. So, you got 1 chip in that pack and you ate it. And I had a glass of milk and I tried not to drink any milk before I got finished with it. But I've never been so hot, and I love hot food, but it was well worth it. I loved it. I loved the
I feel
heat.
like there was a recording of that. Didn't you share you doing that? I feel like I watched that.
I did. I did do a video of it just because there were so many other people that did it. And I went, I can make this. I can do this. But they didn't see off camera after I shut it down. Yeah.
So I've loved your masks forever back there, but there's interest. Can you tell us more about those giant masks on the wall?
Yeah. So Charles Anderson, when I was at Fossil, Charles Anderson came into the studio and, was collaborating with Fossil to do some tin designs and some wash designs. And that was back in like 1990, it may have been 91 when I first started. And then we invited him in to the DSVC to speak to our club. And he did that back in like 95, maybe. When he came in, he was talking about all the design that he did for Target. And so he did all these designs he did the designs for the pajamas for small children, the underwear, the socks, the mask, I mean, just everything. And he talked about all the standees and the things that hung from the ceiling and everything. And so he talked about these masks, and I sat down with him at dinner time and started talking to him, and he said, yeah, Target has these things and they just throw them away. So he said, just go to Target the day before, Halloween, and say, hold these back. And so, I've got oops, what happened here? So I've got the fireman little boy, and these are pretty big. Cinderella, Frankenstein, and then the scary clown. People don't like scary like clowns, but they're vacuum formed. They're pretty thick, but they've held up. I've had them in here since I guess 94. And besides all those, I have the things that they hung from the ceilings, which was the cardboard cutouts, which are a little bit larger than the plastic forms up here. So there's the Wicked Witch and the Good Witch and all that stuff. So
they're amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Mr. Jim Moran has his hand up. Jim, what do you want to ask?
Casey, as I look at some of the posters you've designed, I'm curious if you're beginning any of that stuff by sketching out those images that you want, because it looks to me like you're drawing a lot. So I was curious about that.
Yeah. So, any of the posters I do a word list first. So even when I was doing any of the magic stuff, I do a word list at everything that I can think of that has to do with magic. So, and that's just the word list is images. What images did they use? If it's the hat and the rabbit out of the hat, or that skull, or the hand reading, or something that's disappearing. So I'll do a word list there, and then I'll start looking at copy that they used to say to advertise what they did back then. And then I'll start writing it all out as much, get a lot of phrases, and I start to manipulate on them on my own. And then once I have all that done and on paper, then I'll start to sketch. And I'll do quite a few, quite a few. I'll do 6 to 8 sketches, and I'll finalize on one. But even after I finalize on one and I start to put it into the computer, I'll edit it even after them, because I'll show it to my wife, and she's an artist too. And she'll say, well, I don't think so, Casey. That's probably not so good. But yeah, all the poster work I do is I sketch first, I do word lists, I write copy for it, and try to do something humor. I love the humor and that vintage style that they had. There was, and I have a couple of volumes of Yellow Pages books. They're about 700 pages, and each one are all the little line art cuts that they, if they were going to go visit a plumber, and the plumber would look at, hey, what plumber line art do you have? And so I have 2 volumes of that, and where I get a lot of my line art. And it would look so serious, but a lot of it's playful, and that's kind of what I pull from. If I look at magic, and I'll go through there and I'll go online, and I'll just start to discover things that have to do with that magic, and then I'll redraw them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Well, and the great thing about those Yellow Page books is that artwork is designed to be good at any scale, right? Whether it's big or tiny, it's very clear.
It is. So, a lot of those are maybe an inch high, maybe. And so even after I scan it into the computer. I'm having to redraw every single one of those too, because it's, you know, it's then again, you know, somebody actually drew the thing. They made a stat, you know, put it under camera, and then they printed it. And we're talking about a couple of generations. And then I get it and I scan it, and then I bring it to the computer and the generation. So it just, the detail just starts to go away. So I have to go in there and I'll redraw all that, you know, and then I'll start to manipulate it to whatever the concept that I've got going on.
And I think there's one last good question that goes right along with that. Do you keep your sketches in a sketchbook, or how do you do your process?
Well, it's, you know, I use, you know, I'll use these things that I make, or I'll use the journals that I make, but they're kind of scattered all over the place, or they're on large tracing paper that I do, or on just paper, and they just kind of float around in my upstairs office, you know, which is actually a bedroom, but I'll call it my office. It's part of the headquarters here. It's the second floor.
That's I think a lot of us have those kind of offices.
Yeah.
Well, Casey, thank you so much for coming up on our hour. That was absolutely delightful. Your work is inspiring, and seeing so much more of the process is really exciting. So thank you so much for sharing so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
And I will say there's a couple things that I'll make note of. We have some more upcoming ham hangs. Next week's kind of a funky week, and that is because we have one on Tuesday and we have one on Saturday. We do not have a ham hang on Friday next week. So make note if you normally join us every Friday. And it's just because that's what those people could do, and I'm here for it. And so if you normally have a meeting on Fridays, now you can join us. So next Tuesday, February 23rd at 12 noon, we're gonna be seeing the Reverting to Type 2020. So that is gonna be really exciting. It's the very last day that these protest posters are gonna be up in a gallery in London. So Richard Ardaugh and Graham Bignell are gonna take us around and show us the exhibition while it's still up. So we can't travel to the UK right now, but some of the people in the call are actually in the UK. But anyway, but we can see it that way. And then on Saturday, February 27th, we are going to be with Corey Wesniewski of Three Tiers Press. He does those really beautiful instrument prints using wood type and metal type. So I'm excited for that one. Also, these things happen because of our members. So I want to say thank you to everyone on the call that is a member. Your support makes sure that we can keep ham hangs free, and that we can keep the building heated, and that we can keep doing programming. So I want to say thank you so much. And if you can become a member, it really means a lot to me and Jim and everyone here at Hamilton, because it helps us do the programming that we do. So thank you. I've put that link over in the chat. And then I just did a real quick link for upcoming ham hangs, and you can go watch the previous ones. I think we're up to 53 on YouTube. So if you've missed any, go ahead and watch those. So that's my official business. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Casey.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks everybody for showing up. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for doing such great work.
Yeah.